So thank you, everyone who is joining us. I know we're going to have some more folks trickling in. I'm Art Caplan at the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine, and I'm here this evening, at least where I am this evening, as your moderator. And I'm very honored to get that role. We're going to have, I think, a fascinating debate tonight, but I do want to mention that this debate is sponsored by NYU Health, which you'll hear a little bit about more from me later, and One Day Sooner, which you'll hear a little about in a minute. But the Rikers Debate Project is playing a key role in both organizing this, hosting it, and participating in the debate. And it's a project that does amazing, amazing work, helping inmates improve their reasoning skills, which is critical for getting them ready to pursue their lives outside jail and prison. And it promotes civic engagement and reasoned, thoughtful, and civil discourse, and values that are important to me as someone who does ethics, and I hope are important to all of us on the debate tonight. So why are we here? I'm going to first tell you what the resolution is that will be debated this evening. Then I'll have a little bit of introduction of the sponsoring organizations. Then I will introduce you to the speakers and the judges, and then we'll get the debate underway. So the resolution, as you know, the topic tonight is, should COVID-19 human challenge trials involving young, healthy volunteers take place, whether there is a rescue therapy or not? Just to remind you, a challenge trial is a form of research in which volunteers are deliberately exposed to an agent, in the case of COVID, a virus, hopefully a weakened one. And it's one method of accelerating, potentially, vaccine development and learning more about the disease. If you infect people deliberately and then watch them, you get data back and you know where your subjects are and what's going on with them. At least one institution, Oxford's Jenner Institute, the director there, Adrian Hill, recently said that his lab is hoping to do challenge trials of vaccine candidates for COVID by the end of the year. But COVID trials that are challenge trials present some unique ethical problems and things that have to be considered carefully. Firstly, we have to make sure that informed consent is obtained from anybody who volunteers, and they have to know what the risks are and the unknowns are. And we have to make sure that they understand that right now we don't have a drug should they get sick in the course of being infected with the test agent. And if the vaccine didn't help them, we would have to just put them in the hospital and hope that, ventilator care and ICU care and dialysis might rescue them if they did become very, very ill. The NIH Active Group, which is a group that was formed to advise the NIH on vaccines, recently said that challenge trials should not take place until there's a better rescue therapy, meaning a drug that could reverse the nasty adverse impact of COVID, and that could even reliably prevent mild symptoms from becoming severe. So this debate is not going to settle this evening the question of whether or not challenge trials should take place without a rescue therapy, but we hope as you listen to the speakers and the cases that they make, it will help you understand the points to consider with more sophistication, and that you'll get a lot of input from both the speakers and the judges about how they think about these things, and that'll help advance the general discussion beyond this evening. And I'm tempted to say, I don't know, maybe we will settle this thing tonight, but most likely we'll all come away learning more and understanding better the pros and cons of the question. So as I said, next comes the introduction of our hosts. Division of Medical Ethics has been at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine for about 8 years. I created it. I'm the founding director. I came there from the University of Pennsylvania. We teach medical students. We work a lot with different programs within the medical school, including our transplant center. We have a vaccine ethics project. We have a project on end-of-life care. We have a number of areas where we do both writing about topics and try to study and do research on topics. Sometimes we come up with guidelines. And I think we're really, really proud to also be involved in educational activities, webinars on many topics, including the one we're doing tonight. So Caitlin, tell us a little bit about the Rikers Debate Project.
Thank you so much, Art, and thank you to everybody for being here tonight. I also want to extend a special thanks to Josh Morrison, the founder of the Rikers Debate Project and the person who made this event possible. My name is Caitlin Halpern, and I've taken over as the acting executive director for the Debate Project while Josh is busy with his challenge trial work that you'll hear more about in a minute. I'm also the head of the Houston chapter of the Rikers Debate Project. RDP was founded in 2016 with the mission of teaching public speaking and critical thinking to currently and formerly incarcerated people. We aim to give everyone a say in the decisions that affect their lives and to empower everyone to advocate for themselves and their communities. We started in just one jail on Rikers Island, and we quickly grew to several weekly classes in New York City, and then classes in other jails and prisons in New Jersey, Connecticut, DC, New Orleans, and Houston. COVID has transformed our program as it's transformed all of our lives. Our in-person classes have been suspended since mid-March, and we've had to rapidly respond and take all of our programs remote. So for formerly incarcerated people, we're running a debate program via Zoom. We have multiple practice sessions every week that build up to events like this one, as well as an ongoing George Floyd debate series about defunding the police. So far, we've partnered with Yale and Princeton, and next up, we're taking on Swarthmore. For currently incarcerated people, we're running a correspondence course entirely through the mail. That allows us to continue providing educational services, at least to a degree, and just as important, provides a conduit of information between the inside and the outside. We can send our students reliable updates about COVID every week in our mailings, and we can learn more about what's going on in carceral facilities. Our student reports contain important information that so far has been covered in the Houston Chronicle, the Marshall Project, The Appeal, and ProPublica, among others. As much as the Rikers Debate Project has grown over the past 4 years, we've remained an all-volunteer, grassroots-funded organization that's powered by people like you. And so if after this event you feel inspired to donate or to volunteer, please visit our website, rikersdebateproject.org. As to tonight's debate, this topic could not be more timely or important, and we are so excited to showcase our incredibly talented fellows, Camilla Broderick and Louis Conway. But the best path to a vaccine is uniquely important to the people who can't be with us tonight, our students who are currently incarcerated in prisons and jails. As many of you may know, in prison and jail, social distancing is impossible. Folks are lucky to get a new mask every week or two, alcohol-based sanitizers are banned as contraband, and our students receive soap rations of as little as 2 ounces per week. As a result of these conditions, many of our students have already contracted COVID, some with quite serious cases and side effects that have lingered for months. The rest of our students are terrified that they will be next. And so on behalf of all of our students, I again want to thank NYU Langone and One Day Sooner for the absolutely vital work you're doing. And with that, I'll pass it back to Art.
Thanks, Caitlin. And I'm really pleased to see that you've broken away from second-tier institutions like Yale and Princeton to have us work with you from NYU tonight. Josh, you want to say a little bit about One Day Sooner?
Sure. Thanks, Art, and thanks, Caitlin. One Day Sooner is a group that advocates on behalf of human challenge trial volunteers. And that's important to know because it's not actually a group that advocates for the trials themselves, except insofar as we think that the 32,000 people who've signed up want there to be a challenge study if one is going to be helpful. And obviously we're really thrilled for this event. Part of it is, as Caitlin mentioned, that I was one of the founders of Rikers Debate. And selfishly, I love to get to do more Rikers Debate stuff and get to publicize the great work that RDP is doing. But also, I think that both organizations share some common ideas and common theories about how to change things that have been important to my work with both groups. And that gets us this idea of each group is trying to empower a particular kind of identity community in a way that will make public decision-making and public reason better. So for Rikers Debate, what that means is giving a voice to people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated to reduce the horrible problem of mass incarceration in this country. For challenge studies, it means that, we think that ethical decisions about medical test participation and things like kidney donation, which is my usual day job, would be better if the people who were affected by them, especially the people who took risks to participate in them, if they had more of a voice and more of a say in the system. And that's kind of our main goal at One Day Sooner. And it's something that, I think one of the reasons we're really excited about this event is that we see our work at One Day Sooner, we're partially representing the public, or we're partially a way of being a sort of ambassador of the public into the medical system. And so we want to be, sort of doing things to help the public engage and discuss these important issues. And we see this debate series, and we hope that this isn't the last debate we do with Rikers Debate on this topic. We see this as a way, a kind of model of public engagement and public reason. And the last thing I'll say is that, we at One Day Sooner, much like Rikers Debate, really value this idea of kind of free inquiry and of questioning our own beliefs, of being open to new evidence and new arguments and new ideas. And that's part why we're thrilled to have, and we're really appreciative of Professor Rasmussen coming in as as an opponent of this to be debating in this forum. And we think that we think that the best ideas are ones that are going to be subjected to criticism and where you can hear both sides and improve your thinking. And hopefully that's something that we can get in this round. And I'll mention, although it might be something I will mention either way. So for all the judges and all of the people in the audience, will get a chance to give a ballot. Please vote based on the round itself. It's a game that you're a judge of the contestants. It's not about your personal beliefs about challenge studies. It'll be a much more interesting round, a much more interesting experience if you treat it, like a game and like an event on its own, rather than trying to vote based on kind of what your own beliefs are, however powerfully you hold them. So yeah, we're absolutely thrilled to be here, thrilled for this event, hope that it can be a model for the future, and are really looking forward to the debate tonight.
Thanks, Josh. So now it's my honor to get to introduce our speakers, and then I will introduce our judges. We have a little bit of a game-like context in that we're going to basically have a government team and then an opposing team, which we'll call the opposition. The person acting as the Prime Minister and who'll speak first is Camilla Broderick, and she is part of the Rikers Debate Project and a Debate for Justice Fellow. And then Abie Rohrig will speak as a member of her government. He's the Communications Director of One Day Sooner and a potential challenge trial volunteer, so he's more than a passing interest in this discussion. Then on the opposition team, you're going to hear first from the leader of the opposition, Angela Rasmussen, who's a virologist and associate research scientist at Columbia University. And then Conway Jr., who's a national campaign strategist now at the ACLU. So I think we've got some pretty good debaters, and very excited to have you all. Thanks for doing this. And now let me just briefly introduce the judges. Maybe they can wave if they're up on video so you can see who we're talking about. First is my friend, Dr. Robert Montgomery. He directs the Transplant Institute at the NYU Langone Medical Center. Angela Hawken is professor of public policy and director of the NYU Marin Institute of Urban Management. Carolyn Riley Chapman is one of my colleagues, a faculty affiliate of the Division of Medical Ethics at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. Amanda Sue Nichols is an attorney associated and also an NYU Debate alum. Claudia Passos Ferreira is a visiting assistant professor at the NYU Center for Bioethics on the downtown campus. Anna Burstein is an assistant professor in population health at the NYU Grossman School of Medicine. Justin Chan is clinical assistant professor of medicine at NYU Langone. Ed Nasser is an associate at the law firm of Paul Weiss and also an NYU debate team alum. And last but not least, Jean-Louis Girardin is in population health, another one of my colleagues at NYU Langone Health. What will happen is after the debate goes forward, we will have the judges think about what they heard, and each of them will get a minute to tell us their opinion. They're not going to consult with one another, but they're going to have a minute to just sort of assess how the debate went. I'm watching the time. I've got some pretty vicious timekeepers. They're going to be signaling to me, you get 4 minutes. We will have a opportunity for the judges to speak for 1 minute. We'll try to watch it to keep things moving. Also, we are recording everything. It should be up and available on YouTube 3 days from now. If you want to share this or recommend that somebody else watch it, it'll be there. And we do have a small opportunity for those of you out in the audience tonight to offer what we call a floor speech. There'll basically be time, I think, one in favor of the resolution by the government and one favoring what the opposition said. And if you see the chat function on your Zoom, if you send me a note up there saying, I'd like to take 2 minutes to speak, I'm going to pick 1 and 1. I'm the person who will pick the floor speakers, and you'll just get 2 minutes, but we'll let you have an opportunity out there if you want to volunteer to take it. I think that's pretty much the rules of the road for tonight's event. So unless there are any questions, I'm going to call this House to order. I'm going to call upon the Honorable Prime Minister, Camilla Broderick, to deliver a speech not to exceed 4 minutes, basically in favor of the resolution. Camilla.
Thank you. The government proposes beginning human challenge trials for a COVID-19 vaccine with or without the availability of a rescue therapy. We have 3 reasons why we believe human challenge trials are the most efficient way to produce a viable vaccine. For our first point, the risks of COVID-19 are acceptable even in the absence of a rescue therapy. For young, healthy volunteers, the risk of death from COVID-19 is so low that it is difficult to measure. According to Science magazine, the risk of death is around 1 in 14,000 for 20 to 29-year-olds, which is lower than childbirth or kidney donation. A challenge trial could take place with just around 100 people, making life-threatening complications during a trial highly improbable. The ability to control unknown risk and possible long-term complications is another factor that we believe is understandable given context. Currently, the long-term effects of COVID are uncertain, but as long as participants understand that the risks are uncertain, their consent is legitimate. According to King's College London, nurses and healthcare workers were up to 12 times as likely to contract COVID-19 at the peak of the pandemic than the general population. Are we prepared to say that those nurses and doctors should stay home because they didn't know the risk? And in phase 1 trials, vaccines are given to humans for the first time, and long-term risks are also unknown. When the first kidney donation was performed in the 1950s, the long-term risks were unknowable, yet hundreds of thousands of lives have been saved by taking that risk. For our second point, challenge trials are scientifically valuable. Challenge trials were crucial to our understanding of previous diseases like malaria, typhoid, and cholera. Challenge trials for COVID-19 would be just crucial. According to the National Institutes of Health, a challenge study would address essential questions of SARS-CoV-2 immunopathogenesis, duration of vaccine-induced immunity, and correlates of protection in healthy populations. We know very little about the onset of COVID-19 because people only go to the hospital once they are already sick. The ability to observe participants closely and gather samples while tracing the progress of infection in real time, knowing exactly when they were infected and with what dose, and being able to follow up over a long period would offer an unprecedented level of scientific and medical insight into an unfamiliar virus. Even by only using young and healthy volunteers, we can still learn about the biomarkers of immunity to COVID-19, which will be important to know for more at-risk populations. Discovering these can let us prove a vaccine works for old people or children without waiting months to check if they get infected. Challenge trials will be extremely extremely important just for the data they will provide to researchers. We know very little about the extent to which antibodies lead to immunity. Re-exposing patients who had COVID-19 to the virus could reveal this information, which is crucial to understanding of herd immunity. For our third point, challenge trials can help us test a vaccine. We need multiple vaccines, not just one. Since we have limited manufacturing capacity for each type of vaccine and need billions of doses for worldwide distribution. Also, the first vaccine is rarely the best vaccine, and testing will continue over the next couple of years. Since challenge trials more quickly demonstrate the effectiveness of a vaccine than phase 3 trials, challenge trials can also help us choose between second-generation vaccines more quickly, saving lives. Especially if a moderately effective vaccine is distributed, it may be difficult to recruit tens of thousands of volunteers for phase 3 trials, making challenge trials especially useful. And for all these—
Prime Minister, I have to tell you, your time has ended. I want to thank you for your presentation. Now, let's hear from the opposition, up to 4 minutes. Angela.
Thank you so much. We in the opposition oppose human challenge trials without a rescue therapy. The risk to trial participants are too great. SARS coronavirus 2 is a novel pathogen, and there is still too much unknown to confidently determine who is truly low risk. Although arguments have been made for using a low dose of the virus in healthy participants, severe disease in people without any documented risk factors is not unheard of or even uncommon. Furthermore, there are increasing numbers of people reporting long-term symptoms after recovery, including people who had very mild cases of COVID-19. A recent study in Spain showed that nearly 60% of COVID-19 patients from across the spectrum of age and risk factors developed one or more neurological symptoms, and these were reported to persist in a number of patients. There are numerous reports of persistent respiratory problems or severe lung injury, as well as reports of long-term dysfunction of other organ systems. The principle of informed consent requires trial participants to be fully informed about the risks that they are assuming. While we can inform participants that one risk is death, we can inform them of little else regarding other risks such as permanent injury, chronic disease, or disability from participation. Our knowledge about COVID-19 pathology and the long-term consequences of having COVID-19 is insufficient to enable trial participants to provide informed consent. The risk is also too great to be balanced by the scant potential scientific benefit that would result. A human challenge would provide much less information on safety and efficacy than a well-designed phase 3 efficacy trial, and would not hasten the process by which a vaccine can be thoroughly evaluated for safety and efficacy. Unless a human challenge trial included thousands of volunteers, it would further be statistically underpowered and insufficient to determine vaccine efficacy. As known risk factors include age, male sex, and pre-existing medical conditions affecting large proportions of the US population, a challenge trial would necessarily be limited to healthy young women and may not be able to recruit people equitably within this narrow demographic. This is not representative of the overall US or global population, nor does it address the most important vaccine efficacy question: how safe and effective is the vaccine in people at higher risk of severe COVID-19? Furthermore, as we do not know infectious dose for SARS coronavirus 2, nor do we have an attenuated virus, determining a quote-unquote safe dose for the challenge would be essentially guesswork, and we'd have no confidence that the challenge conditions accurately simulate the conditions under which people are infected in the real world. Therefore, the information that could be gained about vaccine efficacy, as well as immunopathology, for vaccines in any generation of development would be greatly limited and of questionable applicability. Human challenge trials would not address some of the most crucial outstanding questions about vaccine durability. The best results would serve only to confirm the findings of non-human primate challenge studies. Human challenge trials would likely not produce data that would justify further accelerating any vaccine candidate to the market more quickly. Finally, the damage that could be done to the biomedical research enterprise resulting from a failed human challenge trial in which participants were severely injured or died would be catastrophic for public health. Other unanticipated consequences could also greatly harm participants. If challenge trial recruitment is not inclusive, it would further harm efforts to improve equity and access to healthcare in groups that have been disproportionately harmed by the COVID-19 pandemic, including Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities. This could also be economically detrimental to trial participants if they are subject to return to work testing rules or if they are unable to work after participating in a challenge trial. All these could further deepen distrust in vaccines and discourage people from participating in conventional clinical trials or trusting scientists. Any type of scientific gain would be grossly outweighed by the further erosion of trust in the expertise and authority of public health officials, healthcare providers, and scientists like myself. Without a rescue therapy, human challenge trials are neither ethically feasible nor scientifically justified.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Abie, you're a well-known supporter of the Prime Minister, a bulldog. Time for you to do your 4 minutes, up to 4 minutes.
Thank you. To my esteemed opponents, to the honorable judges, and to all of those in attendance, Camilla and I firmly believe that a challenge trial should move forward, even in the absence of a rescue therapy. Challenge trials have offered an unprecedented level of insight into previous infectious diseases like the flu, influenza, cholera, and typhoid, and experts from around the world, from the National Institutes of Health to Oxford's Jenner Institute, say that it can do the same with COVID-19. And in light of the fact that 35,000 people have died this week and millions more are suffering, we think it is very important that a challenge trial move forward. Professor Rasmussen argued that the risks are significant, and this is very much true, but in this speech, I will argue that a challenge trial can move forward while respecting the rights, dignities, and interests of volunteers, and they're justifiable in light of the enormous social value that they can offer. So let's move systematically through Professor Rasmussen's points. Her first point was that the risks are too great in the long run. But it's important here to consider that if the long-term risks of COVID-19 are great, that affects both sides of the risk-reward ratio. So it means that the risks are higher for young, healthy volunteers, but it also raises the stakes of ending this pandemic sooner, because it means that older and immunocompromised populations right now face greater risks in the long run. We think it's better for young, healthy volunteers who have a sense of what they're getting into in a challenge trial to take on this risk so that it can potentially end the pandemic sooner, rather than those older and immunocompromised populations around the world, especially those that are most vulnerable to the virus. The second point was that the scant data, or that the data from a challenge trial would be scant and would not actually accelerate vaccine development. The most important point that we have here is that a challenge trial is not going to help us get a phase 1 vaccine sooner. But importantly, historically, the first vaccine is rarely the best vaccine. And for second generation vaccines that attempt to improve upon the first vaccine, running a challenge trial at the beginning of a phase 3 trial, or in the absence of a phase 3 trial potentially, could be quite important for indicating which vaccine is most effective and allocating resources toward the most promising vaccine. Professor Rasmussen argues that the data set would be quite limited in a vaccine trial, but it's important to note that empirically, in the case of cholera, challenge trials, the efficacy data from a challenge trial was actually used to license vaccine based off of efficacy. And the point here is maybe not to prove that a vaccine is entirely effective, but rather to get an indication for where we should allocate our resources, because we need 16 billion doses if everyone needs a vaccine and a booster to distribute worldwide. And if we can just get some indication of whether or not a vaccine is effective, that can go a long way toward worldwide distribution. The last point from Professor Rasmussen was that this could jeopardize the science's reputation. We think this has it wrong. In fact, a challenge trial, by quickly offering precise data about the correlates of protection to COVID-19, the early onset of pathogenesis, could fill important knowledge gaps that we have right now about COVID-19 and allow us to further fight misinformation. So at the end of the day, what we see is a remarkable opportunity, a unique marriage between the opportunity to respect the rights of volunteers. As a volunteer myself, I think interests of volunteers has to be construed broadly and interpreted broadly to incorporate the altruistic interests of volunteers as well, and something that has enormous social value. In regards to vulnerable populations, the effect of potentially ending this pandemic sooner specifically helps vulnerable populations in particular. And the thrust of the government's case is that it's better for young, healthy volunteers to take on some risk in a challenge trial, so that other people who are more at risk to this challenge trial, who in no way consent to dying from COVID-19, have to take on a risk. So that's the thrust of our case. And we are, proudly as potential volunteers coming forward saying that this is something that is worthwhile. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker for the opposition is Louis Conway Jr. And before I turn the floor to him, I'm also watching the chat room to see if I get volunteers for floor speeches. 2 minutes. One person pro, one person against. Louis, are you ready?
Absolutely.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to the Speaker of the House. Thank you to our guests. Most importantly, thank you to our opponents for bringing such an important issue to the House. In opposition of the Prime Minister's assertion and in support of my teammate, Dr. Angela, the risk of this challenge trials are just too high and they're too unknown, especially without rescue therapy. You see, any type of scientific gain will be grossly outweighed by further erosion of the trust and the expertise and authority of public health officials. You see, I grew up with parents who educated me about the Tuskegee experiment. I'm aware of the mistrust that Black folks have in the medical industry. I'm aware how Black folks have been used in these human trials. And I would seek to offer that COVID-19 is not only deadly for people who are young and healthy, but the long-term complications of COVID-19 are unknown. And the early indications show that they are significant, from brain fog to heart damage. COVID-19 has had lingering problems that alarm scientists: shortness of breath, heart issues, hypertension. I grew up on hip hop, and so when I found out that Scarface was diagnosed with COVID and is now on a dialysis, well, it hit home. When D.L. Hewley, a famed comedian, was diagnosed and is still suffering from blackouts and shortness of breath, well, it hit home to me. And for those of you that watch the news, you understand that Chris Cuomo is still fighting the lingering effects of COVID-19. Prime Minister Camilla spoke of previous challenge trials in which volunteers were deliberately exposed to the disease, but she neglected to inform us that those studies had a rescue therapy that assured that the trial participants wouldn't die. And I want to go back and talk about why Black folks are underrepresented in human trials. I want to talk about why Black folks hold a deep-seated distrust of medical trials. And if these trial recruitment is not inclusive, it further harms the same communities that we claim to be helping. The Tuskegee experiment, some of you may or may not know, ran for 40 years. And 65 years after the experiment, we came back and apologized because we realized that we were using humans basically as animals. Just to learn more about syphilis, we let this group of folks go untreated. And it wasn't until 65 years later that we apologized and we instituted change. And one of those changes was making sure that there was an ethics board that guaranteed that there were ethical boundaries followed, that we were ethically bound to make sure that these folks not only remained healthy afterwards, but we made sure that they weren't just being injected with a virus to see how quickly we could solve the problem. We understand what quickness has done in the opening of states too soon. We have seen what acting in fear has done in opening states too soon. So in closing, I would say that the damage that can be done to the biomedical research enterprise resulting from a failed human challenge trial in which participants are severely injured or died is catastrophic for public health. And I point again to the Tuskegee experiment. Regardless of the known factors, human life is much too valuable for us to play games with. And that, I close.
Louis, you're right on time. Thank you very much. I think these were all very well presented arguments. The moderator is very impressed with the cogency and power of what was said. And we did produce 2 floor speakers, just so you don't think this is all wired. The first is Patrick Rusk. Patrick, can you unmute yourself and say hello and tell us a bit about who you are?
Sure, if that doesn't take away from my 2 minutes.
No, we'll give you that. You can have 10 seconds.
I'm a computer programmer in the Boston area, and I have done a tremendous amount of analysis of COVID data during this time while working from home now for, 5 months? So
Very
that's my
good. The
status.
floor is yours for 2 minutes in favor.
Thank you for the opportunity. I believe that saying that participants cannot be fully informed is a bit infantilizing the options that people have to make choices to deliberately be willing to sacrifice themselves to save many people. I feel like we can't emphasize enough that the ability to shave a month or 2 or 3 off of getting a vaccine into people's hands could save hundreds of thousands of lives. And someone that is of age is completely able to make a decision to be a part of a small group of people that know they are putting everything on the line to save hundreds of thousands. People volunteer for shooting wars, every shooting war, even though they know they could die, they could be permanently injured, they could be mentally, like the worst things happen in war, and yet people volunteer for it. So that really should be out of the discussion to say that someone can't possibly be informed consent. If I had more time, I would talk about the more important issues about what does this mean about PR if something goes wrong. That all has to do with the way that you approach it, the way you publicize it, the way you make it something that everyone's behind, that the people that are involved are understood to be heroes for putting themselves on the line for this, and the expectations set ahead of time that some people may be hurt in doing this in order to bring things quicker. And the issue of whether it would truly give you results that you want, it could give you initial results to find a vaccine that is a rock star so that you can then move on to next waves investigating that rock star vaccine much better.
Tremendous. Thank you. It was very well done.
Thank you.
And appreciate your being willing to step forward. Lisa, are you out there? Unmute yourself and give us a 10-second introduction, and then we'll let you speak for the opposition.
Hi, Art. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Kearns. I'm a senior researcher at the Division of Medical Ethics with Art, and formerly with Carolyn Chapman, who's one of the judges. I will speak for the opposition very briefly. Two of the pro points were not addressed adequately by, I'm not sure of people's names. I believe it was the younger man,
Abie?
Yeah. Okay. So one of the key arguments for challenge trials is this fact that it could be the first of a vaccine that's not perfect, but they are indeed tried in this young, healthy population. That is not applicable to many of the people who are most affected by COVID. I did not see that argument addressed. The elderly, people who have been historically underserved by medicine, who are not generally healthy. I have not been convinced that the results of this challenge trial will be applicable to those populations. I don't see how even a first step out upon which further more awesome vaccines will be built will work if the information is coming only from young, healthy volunteers. So that's my first point. The second point that was not, I don't think, adequately addressed is the fact that if something goes wrong, then the distrust that already exists for vaccines will just explode even worse than it is. We have people who are against vaccines no matter what, but we have people who are hesitant and who are skeptic and seriously consider it, but do worry about risks. And if anything were to go wrong, even and especially in this young, healthy population, I think that could be damaging to any future vaccines.
Thank you, Lisa. Now what we're going to do is go back to the first speakers, the primary speakers, and let them do closing remarks, not to exceed, I think 3 minutes we'll give to each. We'll start, I think, with the opposition to sum up their case and remind them that they can introduce new examples or cases, but you're not supposed to introduce arguments that haven't been put on the floor already. Angela, are you ready?
I am ready. Thank
The
you.
floor is yours.
Thank you. So we've presented our argument that human challenge trials without a rescue therapy are not ethically or scientifically justifiable. A vaccine trial, recruiting participants for a vaccine trial, is not the same thing as recruiting soldiers for a war. Human challenge trials have never been attempted with a completely novel, recently emergent virus that is still a black box with regard to risk for the health consequences of being infected, including the long-term health consequences of being infected. There are still many vast gaps in our knowledge about risk factors that are associated with COVID-19, but death is not the sole harmful outcome, nor is it the sole risk that prospective trial participants need to consider. The scientific value gained from human challenge trials would be minimal, and it would not further accelerate vaccines toward FDA approval for clinical use, including for second-generation vaccines that are further behind in the pipeline. This is a pandemic, and currently we are not at risk of not having enough participants to participate in a conventional phase 3 clinical trial to measure safety and efficacy. And this is not a PR issue. The damage that a failed human challenge trial could do to the already tenuous relationship between scientists, physicians, and the public is potentially so severe that it cannot be quantified. This has profound impacts on public health, and that requires meaningful engagement with the public. You can't have public health without that relationship with the public. Even outside the context of a vaccine, other information about viral load, immunopathology, antibody responses, or correlates of protection that could be obtained from a human challenge trial will not significantly improve our understanding of SARS coronavirus 2 or COVID-19 sufficiently to justify the risks facing participants. It's difficult to ensure that access to trial participation would be fair, equitable, or that a challenge trial would not place participants at significant economic risk. As my partner eloquently and powerfully stated, proposed challenge trials can cause severe harm to marginalized communities in particular, and these haven't really been addressed. The only way that the limited information that could be obtained from human challenge trials would be beneficial enough to outweigh the risks is if a rescue therapy were identified to substantially minimize risk to trial participants. Without such a rescue therapy, human challenge trials require undertaking a monumental risk in exchange for, at best, an incremental reward.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that eloquent opposition. And we're going to close with the summary of the government to deliver the last speech. You have up to 3 minutes in favor of the resolution. Camilla.
All right. I think that what this round really boils down to is first the question of acceptable risks. In lieu of a rescue therapy, challenge trials for COVID involves unknown risks, and this is true. But life itself is full of risks, and science doesn't really move forward without some initial risks. And of course, minimizing the risk is of extreme importance, and I believe that we've demonstrated that the challenge trials would do so through the volunteers picked and medical services provided. As for unknown long-term risks, I believe that we've demonstrated that as long as individuals are fully informed and aware of the fact that the risks are indeed unknown, they can consent to these challenge trials. The risk associated with us not ending the pandemic sooner will be far greater than the risk imposed on a select number of individuals. I think that this is a good analogy, but those who sign up for the military sign up not knowing if they will face long-term health problems, PTSD, or death. But they're able to consent to the unknown because they're aware that that is a possibility. I think the other question is, do the risks really outweigh the benefits? And if the potential benefits outweigh the risks, then human challenge trials have ethical acceptability. As we've detailed, the data we can draw from human challenge trials will be immensely valuable. We could follow the disease from its onset in an individual until the end and learn about biomarkers of immunity and gain an immense amount of insight into the virus, which is helpful to at-risk populations, which I did mention in the first speech. We can also test the efficacy of vaccines at a faster pace. choosing between the best candidates in order to manufacture enough for herd immunity. There's an added benefit of participants who would possibly be exposed to COVID in their day-to-day lives, building immunity and access to better medical care than they otherwise would have received had they been infected outside the trial. The risk of serious consequences like death are so low in young, healthy volunteers, it's highly unlikely. There are risks that come with any vaccine trial, even these 3 trials, but the benefits to ending this pandemic, I believe, strongly outweigh the potential risks. And the last thing we heard is that it would jeopardize science's reputation. And I believe that vaccine skeptics are just not swayed by science. They're the very antithesis to science. We know that complications from vaccine trials will be from COVID and most likely not the vaccine, but anti-vaxxers will only listen to information that fits their narrative and pushes their own view. Even if all the trials went off without a hitch and a perfect vaccine was made, they aren't going to take it because they think Bill Gates is going to inject them with a tracking chip when they go to get it. People who listen to scientists and understand what's going on aren't going to suddenly become anti-vaxxers in the event of a catastrophe. If NASA has a mission failure, they don't worry about people suddenly becoming flat earthers. That demographic is unreachable by science, and we can't cater to an audience that will never win over. Instead, we need to focus on ways to maximize the good that we can do. And to equally be geared to challenge trials when those individuals had no consent and they were lied to. Black people suffer more severely from this pandemic because of worse access to healthcare, and ending the pandemic sooner would only help the Black community. In fact, the data we learn in challenge trials may uncover new information that could help reduce the risk in later trials and in how we deal with the pandemic from a public healthcare perspective, which would only help the public's perception of science. And we're closing. I think
very good, right on time. So again, thank you, speakers. Thank you, floor speeches. Those were great presentations. The judges, you will have a minute here to think about which way you want to vote in favor of the side arguing in favor of the resolution or the opposition. Remember, let's vote on the debate tonight, not necessarily what you bring as prior knowledge to this event. And while I'm letting you think about that a little bit, let me also add, we'll keep the floor open after the judges vote. Some people have to leave and move on to other things, and I'll thank everybody now for their participation. But those of you who want to linger, I think we'll be able to have a kind of a breakout room setting, and Justin, I think, or Abby will hang around a little bit to moderate that for sure. So you have an opportunity. I am seeing questions coming up on the chat box here, and maybe they can go back and forth. So thanks again, everyone. And I'm going to head over to our judges, and I'll just go by first name. You've got their identity and their qualifications.
The audience can also vote. And I just
shared.
I'm
sorry, Josh. We're going to vote now.
I'm sorry about that. Yep. Sorry. The audience can also vote. I just shared a link in the chat for people in the audience who are not one of the official judges to vote. And those votes, we're going to count them up, and they're going to be worth 6 votes compared to the 9 votes of the judges.
Got it. I thought we were going to let the judges try and sway the mob, but okay. Voting right now is fine. Do you want them to vote before I go right to the judges?
No, judges can go.
Okay, in tandem? All right. So, Robert, how vote ye?
Well, I'm going to vote for the government. This was difficult. You know, I come to you as someone who has participated in a challenge trial. I exposed myself to hepatitis C without a rescue drug and with unknown consequences of getting hepatitis C in the context of immunosuppression. And I have to say, Lewis really tested my my core feelings because of what he described about the potential damage, particularly at this moment in history, I think, where the trust in healthcare is so important. But I think in the end, the government presented a really good argument for why the greater good of saving so many lives it carries the day. So
Thank
that's
you.
why I decided on the government.
Thank you very much. Angela.
Thank you. Wow, what a great set of presenters. So let me get right into this. I think it's really important when you're presenting with something like this, how you put that information and make that case within context. I thought Camilla did a remarkable job in her opening statements of really giving life to that data, drawing comparisons to childbirth and kidney transplants. I think it makes it much more relatable to an audience, even a decision-making audience. And you covered a nice breadth of issues, better targeting manufacturing, the role in improving second-generation vaccines. I think where both presenters on the government team did less well was on the issue of the reputation of science as a result of this. I think, Abie even went as far as saying this could help science. I think that's a little dismissive, and you want to be a little careful in presenting on that, because there are legitimate and real concerns about potentially fueling an anti-vax movement and spillover effects. On the opposition side, so I think you could have done a little bit, you could have bolstered that a bit more. On the opposition side, again, great command of the state of the opposition debate, a passionate delivery. I think on the issue of the damage to reputation, I think you guys could have tightened that up a little bit and really driven home the issue of what could this potentially do to fuel that anti-vax movement and the spillover effects of potentially fueling that. I think that case could have been made a little stronger. Strong closing arguments on the timeline and what is the marginal value add here? What does this do for our state of knowledge? But I don't think that teams adequately addressed the issue of the relative risk and reward issue, which is especially important given that these would be volunteers. So overall, both were phenomenal, but I'm going to cast my vote in favor with the government.
Thank you very much. Carolyn.
Hi, everybody. This was such a great debate, and I really enjoyed hearing from all of the presenters and excellent debaters from everyone, including the floor speeches, which were put together in absolutely no time. So I'm very impressed with that as well. My vote is going to also go with the government, and the reason for my decision relates to, well, first of all, the opposition I thought had really, really strong arguments relating to the scientific and social value of challenge trials. And obviously, I think that the reality hinges on this question: how much value would a challenge trial bring? How much would it truly accelerate vaccine to market or our understanding? And certainly, I thought Dr. Rasmussen certainly raised significant questions about the value of the challenge trials. And I agree that they also had strong concerns about fueling anti-vax positions. But overall, I remained convinced by the strength of the government's arguments, and in particular, I thought that Abie's comment about definitely valuing interests of volunteers to contribute altruistically to this pandemic was important. And Prime Minister Camilla's point that science doesn't move forward without risks is an absolute one. And again, all of their comments about the potential, about the magnitude of this pandemic and the lives being lost every day were extremely strong. So thank you for the opportunity to participate in this.
Thank you very much. Amanda.
Hi. Again, I want to thank everybody. I thought both sides did a phenomenal job. It's a good debate where every time someone starts speaking, you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds right. And then the next person starts and you think, oh, no, actually, that's a great point. I think I'm going to go to that side. And I felt that way the entire time. I am going to depart from my other judges thus far and put in a vote for the opposition. And my reason for my decision was that I was very persuaded by Dr. Rasmussen about the limited value of what these human challenge trials could provide right now, as well as by Lewis's point about the absence of restorative therapies, but also not acting so quickly, making questionable decisions just for the benefit of having something done quickly. I also found the opposition's arguments about the risk sort of countering the government's arguments that the risk was just to the individuals making the decision to participate, but that not being the only risk, because there was a risk beyond those individuals to the medical establishment and to other people not potentially taking a vaccine if they don't trust it and trust the medical establishment later on. So it really isn't just a personal risk that the participants will be taking. So I found those to be very persuasive. Obviously, I thought the government had some great ideas, but the risk-reward analysis, I think, just came out on side opposition for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Claudia.
Sorry, I was mute. Okay, so this was really a great debate. Both sides were really giving such very good arguments. But after hearing both sides, I will vote against the resolution. I will follow the previous judge. I think the government made very good points showing us that there are many ethical problems regarding the challenge trials that are not unsurmountable. But I think there was one key point that the opposition made that the government didn't address very well. So government didn't make the case that the benefit was strong enough in lives saved. So I agree that in principle, a big enough benefits in lives saved could outweigh the risks to a group of volunteers. But opposition argued that the benefits are not high, and government didn't make a strong case that the lives saved will be very high. So how many lives would challenge trial save? It's not clear after debate. This is still very unclear. So the case hasn't been made that the benefits outweigh risks. So this is my reasons to vote against the resolution.
Very good. Thank you, Claudia. Right now we're at 3 versus 2 with the pros ahead. Anna.
I will vote with the government, and I want to say this was just such a captivating debate. You really had me at the edge of my seat with every twist and turn of it. To me, there were really 5 points that were really crucial in this. The first was this issue raised by Lewis about, is this another Tuskegee? Can you really have consent from people when there's an unknown risk? And in the end, I really went back and forth on this, but I ended on the side of the government that it is routine in science for volunteers to volunteer for a risk that isn't fully known, that's really what science is about. And Camilla's closing statement really convinced me of that. And then Patrick Rusk weighing in on the floor speech about this is really infantilizing people's ability to choose to take that risk. That word really stuck with me in that argument. Second, is it going to be scientifically valuable? And I thought the government made this point up front that in addition to accelerating toward a vaccine, that we will get correlates and biomarkers of immunity, and that could help everyone, including the vulnerable who don't participate in these studies. I felt that was never really adequately addressed by the opposition, so that point really still stuck with me. The question of equity, I ended up a little bit confused about the question of equity, about if lower risk people are participating in these studies, is that an equity problem? Is it a problem? Do you lose either way, whether you have low risk people participating is good because you minimize risk, but it's not equitable. I honestly ended up confused about which side to go with on that issue. So something I'll keep wrestling with internally. The reputation of science issue, again, something I think I'll keep wrestling with. I'm really on the fence about which side should take that point, but the analogies to the military, the analogies to NASA, and we wouldn't regret a mission failure just because of flat earthers really stuck with me as something to say we have to forge ahead with science, even if there will be people out there. And then finally, the question of benefit to society. Abie really made this powerful point about our goal is to make 16 billion doses, and we really need to allocate resources across many vaccines. And so setting that bar of this is the impact that we're going to have, we're going to get to 16 billion doses, and then also adding that it is in the altruistic interest of volunteers who want to give of themselves. To me, that really made clear what the benefits would be of human challenge studies. So those were my reasons. Really powerful points. I'm going to keep thinking and chewing this over for many days to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Justin.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi. So thank you, everyone. That was a really impressive debate and strong points on both sides. I am going to vote for the government, and I'll tell you a couple of reasons why. So I am an infectious disease physician who works full-time on Rikers Island. So I have been heavily involved in the COVID response to some of the most vulnerable patients we have in New York City. And so I view this through the lens of, would something like this help my patients? And to me, there are two themes that kind of stood out in the discussion. One is it scientifically useful? Are our challenge trials going to produce any beneficial information? And I think while the opposition would argue that the benefit could be marginal, I think they didn't make any arguments that would say that there would be no useful information. So I think both sides would concede that there is benefit to the scientific data from these types of trials. So then what it comes down to for me is it ethical? And there are two sort of themes in terms of the ethics of it that stood out from the discussion. One is, can you have informed consent? And I actually, before coming into this debate, was against challenge trials. So I think it's props to the government that you actually changed my mind on this. And I think some of the points that were brought up, that there are known aspects of the disease and there are unknown aspects of the disease, but participants are asked to participate in scientific research in other things such as phase 1 trials, where there are known knowns, unknowns, and there are also unknown unknowns. So I think the government sort of convinced me that it is possible to have informed consent, even with something where there are things that are unknown about it. The other ethical argument is whether or not these types of trials would exacerbate health inequities. The argument being made that you're not going to include certain risk groups in these trials, so is it going to exclude them from the benefit? But I feel like the government really did make a point that there are pieces of scientific information, such as being able to accelerate promising candidates for comparison, understanding correlates of immunity that can be used as surrogates for larger trials that involve more types of patients. I think some of those benefits can really be more generalizable to everyone, even though challenge trials may not include everyone at the beginning. So those are reasons why I came down in favor of the government.
Thank you. Edward.
Thank you, everyone. Just want to first say, really great job by the presenters. Really enjoyed it and appreciate all the thought and effort that went into this. And I'm a regular RDP volunteer, and of course, I've not been able to go into any of the facilities since the outbreak of the pandemic. So it really brings me some joy to participate in this debate format again. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. So I'm going to vote with the opposition. And I think the main question here to me was, did a really good job. The marginal benefits are worth these. Or not perhaps, but I'm certainly less well steeped in the science than many of my other esteemed colleagues who are judges. But I was particularly convinced by Dr. Rasmussen saying, her presentation on the marginal benefits not really being worth the risks, especially as compared to phase 3 trials. And I think that's really something difficult for the government to contend with, and not something that they really focused on. So of course there is information to be gained from challenge trials, but is it information that can't be gained in phase 3 trials that are safer, that are ethical, that do have these guidelines? And I was just not convinced that that's the case. I do want to say I thought the government did a great job. Both presenters were very compelling, good use of statistics and anecdotes to make a strong point. Camilla's last point on allowing people to volunteer for the military, and that we let people take on those risks actually cut the other way for me. I don't want to speak on this at length, but I'm not so sure it is a good idea to let 18-year-olds volunteer for the risks of the military, even if they are informed of the risks, of the possible consequences. So, somebody knows that they could get sick, but they might not know exactly what it feels like or what it really is like to have a lifelong lung issue or a heart issue, and to be burdened with that from a young age. And lastly, I just want to commend Lewis in particular for his presentation. I thought his bringing up the Tuskegee experiment was powerful, and I thought that his sort of hammering the point that there are risks, there are sort of structural risks that are posed by a failed study that would fall on the very communities that we are trying to help by accelerating vaccine. And so, because I basically was not convinced that the marginal benefit is worth the obvious and ascertainable risk, my vote is for the opposition.
I can get myself unmuted, thank you. And lastly, Jean-Louis?
I'd like to begin by congratulate both teams for having done an excellent job making the case for their argument. The pro-government team laid out the scientific evidence very well and eloquently to support the idea that such trials ought to be conducted. However, they seem to be relying primarily on John Stuart Mill's utilitarian principles, the greatest good for the greatest number. That may not quite apply here. The opposition also made a very good case in terms of what the risk factors, the unknown risks might be. I wasn't really quite swayed by this. But on the other hand, the idea that there are vulnerable groups that are not being equitably represented, that's a significant concern. You probably know about this. Now, all the major pharmaceutical trials are mandated to make effort to increase greater level of participation. The government team seems to not have paid attention to this. So because of that, I feel like the opposition gets the nudge, not by a whole lot, but because of the failure to rebut this point, I think they get the nudge.
Thank you. So I have it as 5 for the government and 4 for the opposition. Josh, what was the vote out in the larger audience?
So the floor vote was, when we cut it off, it was 66-33. And then there was a couple other responses. So it ended up but basically it ends up being 4-2 in favor of governments. Hold on, I'll send the exact amount. But basically, yeah, when we cut it off, it was 66-33 for the governments, which would translate to, we said it would be 6 votes for the floor vote. And so it's 4-2 for governments.
Thank you. So regardless of which side you came down on, I learned an enormous amount from this debate. I had really thought, and I've been in the middle of fights about challenge studies for a few months, about the possible impact on the community of failure or of distrust who's involved in the studies and what it might mean for onlookers. So I think that's a important point that's going to have to be grappled with in future debates. Where this goes in terms of the challenge studies, I think many of you know we've got platforms running. A couple have entered phase 3 in the US, a couple of other countries claim, China, Russia, that they're either releasing a vaccine or doing a phase 3 study in the military. We'll have to see how these pan out a little bit, but I suspect there's been interest at Oxford and there's been interest at the NIH to prepare a purified agent to be used in a challenge study. So we may yet see a push to go in that direction depending on the efficacy of and safety of the initial candidates. So I doubt this will be the last time this subject gets debated. I want to really thank everyone who participated this evening in the debate. I want to thank you for the work you did. I enjoyed the passion that was brought to the activity and thought that people really took things seriously and tried their best to both make their case and listen to the points that the other side had to make. Thank you, judges, for listening so closely and carefully to our speakers this evening. I want to thank again Rikers and One Day Sooner